Hello and welcome to the cozy confines of my condo office here in the worldwide headquarters of Michael Sladek Photography for a conversation, a video comparison of two lenses. On the one hand, we have the Fujinon XF 16 to 55 millimeter 2.8. I won't go through all the other letters. And on the other hand, we have the Sigma 18 millimeter to 50 millimeter f2.8. So we have two hands, two lenses, and lots of differences. In this video, what I'm going to do is do a brief intro about how I'm going to approach this, my use case, and what you can expect from this video. There are time codes down below if you'd like to take a look at those. Additionally, I've done individual videos about each of these lenses, both the Fujinon and the Sigma, and I'll leave links to those down below as well. After we do this intro conversation, then we'll get into a little bit of the specs of the lenses and prices. Then we'll talk a little bit about autofocus. That will be a short conversation because they're both really good, spoiler alert. Then we'll talk about image quality, and then we'll talk about some recommendations, my thoughts on all of that. So again, time codes down below, take a look, jump ahead if you need, if you want, but feel free to watch all of this in splendor. So before we begin, here's some introductory thoughts. Obviously, lenses are so very, very personal, maybe even more personal than choosing a camera. So what works for me may not work for you. My opinions and use cases will likely be different than yours. So please factor that into what I'm going to share with you. I think I kind of fall into kind of the middle of a use case in that I have lots of personal use, some professional use. Mostly photography, just a teeny bit of video with these guys. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Another reminder, in my opinion, in the modern, wonderful world we live in, there are really no bad lenses anymore, at least from the first-party manufacturers and third-party manufacturers that aren't basically giving the lenses away. So that's good news. On the flip side of that, there's also no perfect lenses. So every lens is going to have something you wish it did differently, whether that's its price, its weight, its size, its performance, all those things. So know that going in, know that every lens is a compromise. Every lens, you're going to have to figure out what's going to work best for you. In this review, we will do a little pixel peeping. I'm going to do some side-by-side in Lightroom. We'll show you some of the photos. We'll even zoom in a little bit and take a look at some of the things that kind of surprised me about the differences between these two lenses. And related to that, I kind of had a bias going into this, the one I thought I would greatly prefer at the end. And when I get to the end, I'll share the surprise about that. Although we will do a little pixel peeping, there will be no photos of brick walls, so I just don't get it. What I'm trying to do here, the photos you're going to see are walk around a local little pond area that we have. So it's real things I would normally make photos of anyway. So that's how I test a lens. Photos I would make anyway, not brick walls. I know there's some things you can learn from brick wall photos, but it doesn't help me that much. Unless you're a brick wall photographer, then you need to know what it's going to do with the photo of a brick wall. Additionally, I did not test every focal length and aperture combination in the brief video we're going to do here, just because there's too many variables. So what I did instead was lean into why you get both of these lenses. You get them for f2.8. So a lot of the photos are going to be at f2.8, and there will be a few at f5.6, or I think there's even a couple at f8, just to see how that works along the way. So a little bit more about my typical use cases. I've had the Fujinon 16 to 55 for about 6, maybe 7 years, maybe even longer. I typically use this for events. So weddings or other events where the fast aperture, the f2.8 is really helpful, and the image quality is just stunning with this lens. The other major use case for this lens has been for video. So I had to swap it out because I'm holding it. So I'm using the 16 to 80 Fujinon today for video. So that's, if the video looks different, that's why. But I've used this for video. I really like it for this talking head scenario, this headshot. So it works really well for video for that. And my use case for the Sigma is a little different in that this isn't even my lens. This is my wife's lens. So she uses it for basically it's on the camera. It's what she needs 95% of the time. It's a great lens for that. It's compact, it's small. So related to all that, let's talk about the specs. So on the one hand, you have the Fujinon that goes to 16 millimeters and 55 millimeters. And on the other hand, you have the Sigma, which is only 18 to 50 millimeters. So you get a little more wide, a little more zoom telephoto on the Fujinon. On the one hand, you have the Fujinon at $1,200 US, and on the other hand, you have the Sigma at $550 US at the time of this video, which is February 2023. On the one hand, you have an aperture ring. On the other hand, you have no aperture ring. So on the one hand, you have 655 grams, or about 1.4 pounds. And on the other hand, you have 290 grams, or about 10.2 ounces. So quite a big difference there. On both hands, you have no optical image stabilization built into the lens. But having said that, I've used the Fujinon quite a bit on the X-T2, X-T3, which do not have camera stabilization, and I've had really good results with that. On the one hand, you have weather resistance built into the lens. On the other hand, you have none that's listed, but there is at least on the back of the lens, there's a little gasket, a little rubber gasket. So I'm imagining that provides a little bit of protection, if not weather resistance. So as you can see, very different philosophies in lens design, very different philosophies in probably what they're shooting for as far as a market. This is, on the one hand here, we have the red badge Fuji lens, which is their higher line of lenses. And on the other hand, this is Sigma's contemporary lens, which is kind of their prosumer, I would call it, consumer-oriented lens. They have a lens series above this called the Art series, which tends to be more expensive. A little bit about autofocus on both lenses. In my experience, I'm not going to show you video of it because it's just, I mean, if there's any difference, it's milliseconds, which doesn't add up to, again, a real world difference in my experience. Both the autofocus systems are fast, very quiet, very reliable, very accurate. I didn't notice any difference between them when I've used either one of them. They feel like they get out of the way with autofocus and I can count on it. So good, 2 thumbs up for both lenses on both hands for autofocus performance. A little bit more on autofocus in that I didn't do any video autofocus comparison because that's not something I'm going to probably do much with either one of these lenses as far as pushing either one to the limits or pushing them in a kind of extreme use cases. Again, my most primary use of this lens currently is for these videos I make for YouTube. So I've never had a complaint with it on the X-T3 that makes the videos here. So there we go. I'm really happy with this. I've done just a little bit of video with this and it seems fine and at least as good as it is in stills as far as autofocus performance, speed, accuracy, and lack of noise. So it's very quiet. So in a summary about autofocus, in my opinion, I don't really see a clear winner between these two. Again, in my use cases, they both are excellent. No complaints in my experience with either one of these lenses for autofocus performance. So let's move on to looking at some images from both of these lenses, and we'll do some side-by-side comparison. Again, what I'm trying to do here is get some, typical use case. They're kind of landscape-ish. We're going to explore a little bit of what it looks like kind of at a normal viewing distance, normal zoom range kind of photos. We'll do some comparisons of what 50 millimeters looks like versus 55 and what 16 looks like versus 18, the field of view differences. I'll do a little bit with getting closer to the subject, see how close we can get and what that looks like. We'll take a look a little bit at tree branches against the sky to see what we get with any kind of fringing in these lenses. And then we'll do a little bit of a couple studio photos, product photography, which is another use case I have for using the 16 to 55 that I currently own. Before we head over to Lightroom, just a note, I will leave a link down below to all these photos in full resolution on Flickr. So if you want to do a side-by-side comparison on your screen without the YouTube compression or all that good stuff that happens in the internet, I'll have a link below to these photos on Flickr. So let's get started, hop over to Lightroom and take a look at some of these images. So we'll start things off with just this quick look at you know, a fence. I know it's not, I said no brick walls, but I didn't say no fences. So here's a fence with some background behind it. The Sigma's on the left, and I'll try and keep the Sigma on the left in all these photos, and the Fuji's on the right. So 50 millimeters versus on the left versus 55 millimeters on the right, both at f2.8. Both look good to me. I mean, I can zoom in a little bit. I think I missed focus here a little bit, my bad. Both these photos are on tripods to try and get pretty much the same look as much as I can. So there's that. I mean, they both look great. No major differences in image quality as far as either when you're at this kind of view or zoomed in. Next, we'll do a little bit closer photo, also at 50 and 55 millimeters, both at f2.8. Again, I'll zoom in. This is 200%. I'm not sure how well you can see what's going on here, but as far as differences, I'm not seeing tons of difference. They both look, again, good to my eye. I'm happy with either one of these. They look really, really good. So yeah, hard to tell a difference at this point. So for the next photo, I took the camera off the tripod because I wanted to get really close as I could to this little bit of moss on this stump. And as you can see on the left, we have the Sigma at 50 millimeters, excuse me, f2.8. We can get closer, more image magnification than you can at a approximate minimum focusing distance at 55 millimeters on the Fuji. Again, what that does is you know, look at the backgrounds. They're a little different as far as blur because of the subject to background ratio and how depth of field works. So this little bit of extra magnification does quite a bit of help in making your background a little blurrier if that is something you would like. Next set of photos is another fence. Again, the field of view difference between 50 on the left and 55 millimeters on the right. Image quality wise, I'm not seeing a ton of difference, although again, if you're looking at the background here at f2.8, you do get a little more fall off when you're not to autofocus faster than you do at 50 millimeters. Again, that's just how depth of field works. So, but image quality overall, looking really, really similar to me. Yeah, I'm not seeing a big difference between either lens yet. So stay tuned. We're getting there to where we're going to start seeing some differences. Same fence, now at 18 millimeters on the Sigma, 16 millimeters on the Fuji. So you get to see a little bit what that extra couple millimeters gets you on the wide end as far as field of view. So trees and sky, a little noticeable difference here between the two. Again, the Sigma's on the left, Fuji's on the right. We got a little more contrast in the Fuji. We get a little darker blues in the sky here. Also a little more contrast in on the tree itself. So image rendering is a little different here and becomes a little more noticeable when you have the more dramatic contrast situation. We'll do another one at wide angle to see how that looks as well. So similar here, again with the similar situation of a little more blue, a little more contrast here, more contrast in the trees. So definitely noticeable here in some image quality difference, image rendering, I should say, in how each of these treat the scene. Personally, I know I can get, if I wanted to, the Sigma to look like the Fuji on the right with a little bit of time editing the photo in Lightroom, but it's nice to have it maybe closer to what you want in camera before you get to the software. Which one is quote unquote better? I'm not sure. I mean, they're different. I guess this becomes a personal preference. If I didn't see them side by side, I don't know that I would notice the difference. So that's an important distinction as well to be aware of. In these two photos, I wanted to show again another example of the extra closeness and magnification you can get from the Sigma versus the Fuji. So here we're got this little raindrop and reflection. I'll zoom in. So I think I missed again focus here, off tripod again. I may be just inside the minimum focusing distance on the Fuji, so it's not quite as sharp, but the Sigma is pretty sharp. This is, by the way, 200% zoom. So we're seeing quite a bit of detail here. As you move around a little bit, you know, nothing screaming at me as far as any kind of issues technically in the photo, but we'll talk more about that in the next little bit of photo, so hang on. But yeah, I like this little extra bit of reach, if you will, of being able to get close to your subject and get a little more magnification if that's what you like. And that is something I do like quite a bit. This next comparison of photos, what I was mostly interested in this photo was the bokeh, the blurry balls of background light here, and how the rendering is different between the two lenses. Each of them has kind of their own character and characteristics. Again, if they're not side by side, I don't know that I would really say there's a difference, but looking at them, I would characterize the Sigma as maybe being a little quieter. As far as the bokeh balls, this is a little busier on the right. Again, that's a function of maybe the extra 5mm of zoom, but yeah, the difference is there. Now, here's where I noticed quality difference between the two lenses as I zoomed in, and it's right here. So we've got a little bit of fringing on the Sigma on the left here, right around this part of the branch, and it's missing here on the Fujinon. So that's where your extra money is coming in through a combination of lens design, lens construction, coatings, all those things that cost the extra money and also add size and weight potentially. That's one of the first places I've seen a noticeable image quality difference between these two lenses. Speaking of kind of minimum focusing distance, let's talk a little bit about that in the studio. Let's take a look at how that compares. So on the left is the Sigma at about 6 1/8 inch, and on the right is the Fuji at about 9.5 inches. I know that's different than the listed specs for minimum focusing distance, and it doesn't sound like that much of a difference, about 3.25 inches of minimum focusing distance difference, but it makes for, when you're that close, it makes for quite a big difference in image magnification. So when minimum focusing distance is listed on a spec sheet, it's from the distance from the object to the sensor. So the reason there's only about 3 inches of difference here in the minimum focusing distance from the front of the lens is because the Fuji is so much bigger physically. It's a lot longer than the Sigma. So that kind of accounts for the difference between the listed specification distance, minimum focusing distance, and my experience here measuring to the front of the lens. So that's the difference in distance. Let's take a look at the image. They look roughly similar, a little softer than I would like for either one. Out here, it looks fine. I mean, I'm totally fine with it here. When you zoom in, yeah, okay, it's not quite as maybe sharp as I'd like. The focus was placed on the 1.4 in both cases. Camera is on a tripod here, 1/30th of a second. Did use self-timer to get just a little stability before the photo was created. So as I mentioned, one of my typical current use cases for the Fujinon 16-55 is product photography kind of like this, either for my YouTube thumbnails or for fun or for commercial clients. So a photo like this is relatively common use for me with the Fuji. So I wanted to see how the Sigma performed in comparison. So again, the focus point is on the 1.4 here on the aperture ring, and camera's on a tripod, self-timer again. Let's zoom in. So a noticeable difference this time. Camera distance to subject is about 2 feet here. So we're away from the minimum focusing distance a little bit. So noticeable sharpness difference when you zoom in, and this surprised me, frankly. The Fujinon is quite a bit sharper at 2.8. So it's quite a big difference. I do tend to do studio stuff at 2.8 when I can. I do like shallow depth of field in studio shots too. So that's my use case. But then I thought after I did this, let's see what it looks like with stopping down the aperture in both cases. So we'll take a look at those photos next. So here's both lenses at f4, same setup otherwise. Now the Sigma is catching up a little bit as far as sharpness, but the Fuji's still sharper. It is noticeable. Let's look at f5.6 next. So here's f5.6, and by this point, I think the Sigma is caught up. And I know for a lot of studio type uses, you do want to be at f5.6, f8. That is where most lenses tend to perform their best optically from a sharpness and contrast standpoint. So, and also in a studio setting, you often do want, or a product setting, you do want a deeper depth of field. So in this case, you know, I think it's caught up. So simple solution, f5.6 for studio photos. Let's take a look at one more. This was at 50 millimeters and 55 millimeters on each lens. Let's take a look at the wide end and see what it looks like in the same setting. So let's take a look at the wide angle product type photo, how that looks on each lens, how it performs at f2.8. So we got the Sigma at 18, the Fuji at 16 millimeters. Again, from here, they look pretty similar. So let's zoom in and see what we got. So on both cases, pretty similar. Both are a little softer than they are at, well, especially the Fuji is noticeably softer than it is at 50 millimeters at f2.8. So something to be aware of. Again, this is where, you know, you can't just judge a lens by one parameter. They tend to have personalities and will behave differently at different focal lengths and different aperture combinations. So that's kind of a quick look at side-by-side of these photos from both lenses and image quality, rendering, and all that kind of stuff. So let's wrap this up and talk about some final thoughts and potential recommendations here. So yeah, it's complicated with lenses. You would think that on the one hand, the much more expensive red badge Fuji would absolutely wipe the floor image quality and performance-wise with the $550 much lighter contemporary Sigma lens. But they're a lot closer than you might expect from just reading the spec sheets and from the price point, at least in my opinion, my experience. Comparing lenses is complicated. It's more than just a spec sheet. It's more than just the price. And it's more than just comparing side-by-side images. It's really important for you and to identify what your priorities are, what your typical uses are, and then find as much information you can to find out whether a lens is going to do the things you want to do at the price you want to pay. So in my case, I was really, really rooting for the Sigma, and I thought it would just be practically no differences between the two in almost any scenario. As we saw, there are differences. Are they critical in most of my personal use cases? No. Some of the fringing, I can correct that. The sharpness, you know, something to pay attention to if I do ever do any product photography with this. When I started this comparison, I was really rooting for the Sigma. I was thinking there's not going to be much visible difference between the two lenses. I've used this lens a little bit and I've really, really enjoyed it. I've had this lens for a long time, the Fuji, and also really enjoyed it, but it's so big, it's so heavy, and it's so expensive. So I tend to not take it out casually. So I thought, oh, this is going to confirm my suspicions about this being a great, great value. And it did. This is an amazing lens for the money. But there are some specific cases where that extra money is worth it if those detail things that I've shown you in the comparison are important. This is a good example, I think, of how getting that last 10% of performance can be so expensive, both to create, to engineer, and what the result is we're basically holding it here. This gets you that extra 10%, but it costs double both in dollars and weight. So you have to decide if that's worth it, literally, as you're weighing the differences here. So who are the two lenses kind of geared towards? I think that's relatively easy. I think, you know, this is geared at pro type folks who might be getting paid to do that, or folks who really, really place an emphasis and an importance and priority on absolute image quality. This is a better image quality lens. But having said that, I think most photographers would be absolutely satisfied with the Sigma. It is a wonderful lens. This is fun. It's just cute. It's really nice to use. Because it's so light and so easy to carry around, it's much less obtrusive. I mean, just look at pointing these two big honking pieces, this big honking piece of glass at somebody versus this, or at any situation. You're just You stand out a lot less if you're wandering around with this. So this is a great travel lens, a great, more, again, I'll just say casual type thing. Doesn't mean you don't take your photos seriously, but your primary audience might be you as the photographer rather than a customer with this lens. A couple of things, other things to consider besides image quality and in the difference between these two lenses is there's a couple usability things. And one of those is aperture ring. The Fuji lens has one, the Sigma does not. I've quickly adjusted that on my XH2S. It's just kind of a quick muscle memory back to my old Nikon days of the back wheel, control wheel on the camera to change aperture. So I remembered that pretty quickly. A bigger difference, at least, and a little more muscle memory fighting for me, is that the zoom on the Sigma moves in the opposite direction than the Fuji does. So it's whenever I'm at one of the extremes or anywhere and I want to go to the direction I think, I always start out the wrong way first. But I'm getting there. If I use this lens more frequently, I would quickly adjust to that. But that's, two factors to consider, how usability is important, how the lenses feel, how they feel to you. So in the end, both of these lenses are great. I think most people would be extremely happy with either lens. And it literally does come down to weighing the differences and deciding which one is a better fit for you, almost physically, because this is significantly heavier. And again, I just smile when I look at it. It's just a cute little lens, and it just is fun to use. Not that this isn't fun to use, but I know I'm working when I'm using this lens. So maybe that is about all the difference I can summarize between these two lenses. Another suggestion, if you're considering either one of these lenses, if you have any specific questions you'd like to ask me, go ahead and leave those in the comments below. Another thought on how to decide between these two or any lenses is to do a rental of the lens. Borrow it for a week. It does cost some money. I think it's lensrentals.com has a rent to own program where they would apply at least a portion of your rental fee to an eventual purchase of that used lens. So that might be an option as well. So yeah, it's nice to have all these options, to have so many different varieties and obvious differences between two lenses, but that have less obvious differences in most cases of image quality. So it's a nice time to be a photographer. It's kind of nice to have these options. So I hope this video has been helpful. I hope there was some insight and information for you between these two lenses. Again, if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts, I'd appreciate them in the comments below and like to have a conversation with you about all that stuff. So I have to go return the Sigma to my wife's camera so she can go out and do some photos when she's ready to do that. And I'm going to return my Fujinon 16-55 to my video camera for the next video I'm going to be recording very soon. So until that video, I hope you stay safe, stay well, and have fun creating photos. Bye for now.